Hi. Welcome, everybody. It is Friday, and it is the 6th of February, which is astonishing. And because it's Friday, we're turning our heads to housing again. And this time we're taking up a different angle to housing and an essential piece. This committee addresses barriers to housing and all the sort of low-hanging fruit to how we can do more housing for less money. But we also need to be addressing actual money. It takes money to build houses. So we are going to turn to S238, which is a bill. And Kirby, if you want to just join us because you're going to get going in a sec. Good morning, David. We're just starting. We're live. So this morning we're turning to revenue for housing. We have our housing trust, three of our finest housing brain trust members here to help us appreciate the need for additional revenue. But it has struck me, serving in this committee since 2017, that and going through the pandemic and having spent and allocated $600 million in new revenue, building thousands of units in this state of housing, that with the loss of all that money, with the loss of that revenue stream, if we're going to continue to build housing, and if we're going to meet our goals are to build 7,500 units of new housing a year. I asked VHFA and the Brain Trust to calculate how many of those actually needed state funds, how many of those needed state supported or enabled funds. And that figure came back at 4,000. 4,000 of those 7,500 units need financial support that is from the state or enabled through tax credits. Given that, and given that we are now building at best 3,000 a year, and that's with all that delicious ARPA money, we're going to be way behind the ball here if we don't identify an additional source of revenue. Ted, there's a seat here. You can just speak from it when we get there. Great. So I work with several stakeholders over the course of the summer and fall, developing a proposal. It's a beginning of a proposal for us to look at how we might build a housing revenue stream. For example, VHIP, a program we love and care enormously about, has no real funding source other than the general fund. VHCB, and maybe we'll talk about what they fund and how they fund this. It is not enough to meet our need at the moment. Our need is enormous. We are in a housing crisis. And if we are in a housing crisis, we have to bring all the tools to bear on solving it. And many of those are regulatory, permitting, zoning. We're addressing many of those. But we also need to address financing. And the power of the purse in the state is substantial and can really enable enormous things. But we need to put financial muscle behind solving this crisis. And so this bill begins to address it. It's a starting point. And it is one we have discussed for a very long time in this building. It began on a dollar amount at $2 a night per lodging establishment, when lodging establishments were just hotels and B&Bs. And they have morphed into, as we know, something much more substantial. So it has morphed to a 2%. We explored all sorts of numbers, but we've landed for an introduction at 2% on all lodging. This bill claws back the short-term rental income out of the Ed Fund, where there is almost no nexus between that and the Ed Fund. It proposes how to fill that gap and more for the Ed Fund through a sugar or sweetened beverage tax, another tax that we've looked at for a long time. As far as I know, serves nobody. Because as we learn, one of the first rules in Ways and Means, as you learn, is to tax the bad, incent the goods, and sugar sweetened beverages are a good bad to tax. I don't care what your income is, they're not great. And so with that, this proposal is really a beginning, hoping to launch the discussion of how do we look realistically at raising revenue for housing to meet the needs of our housing crisis that we're in. So with that, that is sort of my rough introduction as the lead sponsor on this bill. Any questions for me? I mean, we're going to have the brain trust come and chat, and we're going to have our Ledge Council and JFO just high level walk us through, and then we'll dive into it. Is that okay with
I just
everybody?
have one question.
Yeah.
In terms of the housing you mentioned, currently 4,000 a year. I'm assuming you mean 4,000.
Affordable, you know, what needs our statement.
Right, and that 4,000 needs finished in the year, not started.
That we can discuss. But the challenge,
That's a critical question.
that is a critical question, and I can't answer it but it's a good one. What is challenging right now is the pipeline is beginning to dry up with the lots of money.
At some point, is it possible to build a matrix of how you get from here to 4,000, given, notionally X number, media, X number tax credit, X number, whatever the mechanisms are?
Yeah.
And then kind of summarize it. What does it really mean?
I think that's a good question, and one I think we need to ask the three that we're gonna
Because when we take it, like, when we talk about one topic, another topic,
right.
it doesn't kind of gel into, well,
The whole picture of how do we get to 4,000? How do we get to building 3,000 a year or completing 4,000 units of what are considered needing state and or state funds in some capacity. So with that, we're going to do a high level look at this bill and high level look at what it generates and and in some ways the other jurisdictions, because many jurisdictions around the country, if you look at every hotel bill, there's a housing surcharge of some variety. If you're in any major city, so we're going to just briefly talk about that in this introduction. And I really want to spend some time because we have Chris and Polly and Gus here to talk about the need to paint the picture of it. So, Kirby, without further ado, you'd be kind of just a high level walk us through 238.
Okay, so Kirby Keegan, Legislative Council. We're going to do a quick walkthrough of S238. The first section is the findings. My understanding is that we have wonderful witnesses this morning to talk about housing needs, so we'll skip over those findings for now, but of course you can read them for yourself. So we'll start with section 2, starting on line 15 of page 3. This is the imposition of a rooms tax housing surcharge. Pretty straightforward. It is a 2% surcharge on top of the meals and rooms tax. The tax base for this would be the same tax base as the rooms component of the meals and rooms tax. So that is going to be hotels, bed and breakfast, short-term rentals, everything that the rooms tax applies to would be applied to in this case. And the revenue from this would be dedicated to housing. And we'll get to the fund created in a moment on that. Section 3, page 4, is the creation of a sugar sweetened beverage tax. On a very high level, this is a tax of 1 cent per ounce.
This is what bill is this? Sorry.
238.
This is the piece that so this also claws back the short-term rental tax for housing and then replaces what is lost in the ed fund with the sugar sweetened beverage tax.
Right.
And this is, again, as I said, the beginning start of this discussion will obviously goes to finance. They may find that this actually raises more money for the ed fund than the STRs does.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, Ted will be able to share a little info on that. Okay. So getting into a real quick version of an explanation of the sugar sweetened beverage tax. It's 1 cent per ounce for sugar sweetened beverages, the liquids, but also powders and syrups that are used to make beverages with. It's imposed on the distributor. The distributor would have a license and pay the tax or remit tax to the department tax. And we have, of course, many definitions for different components of that. And we have the appeals process, penalties, interest, the things that are typical with a new tax type. And with that, unless you have more questions, we can just say that's what's here. This is based off of the language that I used here was from the last time this was introduced in 2019, except that we changed the tax amount to 1 cent per ounce, which is less than that's a slower rate that was proposed.
And this money would go to the ed fund to replace what the short-term rentals are raising now, and then some. And
So we'll be talking about this. There's a new housing special fund being created here. The room tax surcharge and what the existing short-term rental surcharge that exists would be in revenue sources for that housing fund. The sugar sweetened beverage tax exists here to replace money to the ed fund that's being directed over the housing from the short-term rental surcharge. Okay. Okay, so the next section we have is section 4 at the bottom of page 11. This is the part where we're taking that short-term rental surcharge revenue out of the ed fund and moving the sugar sweetened beverage tax into it. Section 5 is the housing investment special fund that I just mentioned. It's a new special fund that's created with the revenue sources that I just mentioned, short-term rental surcharge and the room tax surcharge. And the way that this fund would work is that basically the General Assembly would be appropriating out of it each year for specific housing purposes. So it's not a type of fund where some agency just has access to that money. The General Assembly would be making the decision to appropriate out of that for specific housing. And it does list in the statutory language some of the intended purposes for this funding, such as to support housing development projects, including development of affordable housing units, permanently affordable housing units, service supported housing units, and transitional housing. And then section 6 at the end here is just making that fiscal year 27 appropriation out of the fund for its first year. So $5 million is appropriated for the Department of Housing and Community Development for use for VHIP, and then the remainder of the estimated revenue from this is appropriated to support housing development projects through the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. And that is the quick version of this 38.
yeah, Dave,
Not sure you have it yet, but does JFO have an estimate on what kind of funds would be generated from these two?
that's what you're about.
Great segue for Ted.
So why don't we segue to Ted? 'Cause I would love to, before we dive, we're obviously this is full of things to discuss. I'd love to hear from Ted and set up what this might generate, and and then I would really love to have us hear the needs framed up and discuss while we have the Housing Brain Trust here, which would be great. Ted.
Sure.
And you have on your desk, I believe, some of Ted's custom. Thank you, perfect.
Sure. I'll hang out for a minute in case Ted wants to back up.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Slightly electric. Okay.
Great, thanks. Read it all now.
Perfect.
Right.
So on this, in another committee, we have,
Introduce yourself.
oh, I'm sorry, Ted Barnett, Joint Fiscal Office. In other committees, acquired the term fiscal walkthrough. So we can now, Kirby does a walkthrough, we now do walkthroughs. It feels new, it feels exciting.
That's what we want this committee to be, always exciting.
It's the small things. So yes, we're gonna go through, the first table talked about, I find it's always helpful that when we're talking about a surcharge, exactly what the rate would be in different permutations compared with current law. So this first table walks through those. In current law, right, rooms tax 9%, you have your 3% STR surcharge, that's 12%. With 2% surcharge, those rates move to 11 to 14%. You have towns with a local option, and so you add a percentage.
And you have
to those now.
Burlington in there.
I do have Burlington.
Yeah,
now, correct.
Yeah,
Yep.
Burlington is, you know, and we've obviously going to talk about what places that already have this in place because Burlington already has an aspect of this.
Yes,
A big aspect.
Yeah.
they do. Yes, it's their rate. They have a gross receipts tax, which they've been given the ability to do this through a charter change. Yeah, their gross receipts tax rate on preferential is 9%, and it also is 4%. So that would be in Burlington. This would layer on top of those rates as well.
Oh, yes. Anyway, all up subject for discussion.
How much discussion? I mean, like,
A lot.
I don't,
But we're just hearing the proposal and then we'll
Okay.
have the discussion after we hear from Chris and
Okay.
Gus and
like, to decide whether or not this would even make it out of committee.
I think we have, before we jump to any
Okay.
threats
Okay.
or any.
No, I just like, I don't know how,
I think-
I won't say anything if
I
we're just waiting
the
until.
discussion will happen after we hear.
Mhm.
I'll paint the picture of the need, and
Okay.
this is just to get the conversation going about how do we, going forward with no ARPA money,
I think that's
meet
a great
the,
idea.
meet the need of housing
Mhm.
revenue, which we don't have.
I'd
which we-
love to have that conversation.
That's what this is about, really, though. But in all honesty, that is what this is about, is how we raise more money for housing. So, Ted, why don't you finish, and then we will turn to Chris and Polly.
Sure. So preliminary estimates of the revenue that this 2% housing surcharge would raise on the rooms tax. So in fiscal year 27, it's 16.4 million. That's with the effective date is August 1st. So you would receive 10 months of revenue in that first year. Folks remit in September based on their August revenue. So once it goes to effect, we would only see 10 months of revenue in that first year. And then fiscal year 28 would be 20 million, as I said. In addition, the Housing Investments Special Fund would receive revenue from the 3% STR surcharge. I will note that in this table, it's very conservative for fiscal year 27. In conversation early on with some folks at JFO and Kirby, we haven't yet talked with the tax department about any sort of implementation with the sugar sweetened beverages excise tax. And you
Right.
didn't want to pull the SCR surcharge from the education fund until you were sure that the revenues from the sugar sweetened beverage excise tax. So this fiscal year 27, this is just a placeholder. As conversations move forward, we would connect with the tax department and get their thoughts about the appropriate effective date. And so here we just assumed it was in the middle of the year. So that it doesn't assume too much revenue. And then I have to come back and say, well, actually, you have less money to spend in 27 than you're expecting.
Right.
So all in total, between those two revenue sources in fiscal year 27, it's an estimated 20.8 million in fiscal year 27, and then 29.6 million in fiscal year 28, because you're receiving a full year of revenue from the STR surcharge.
Hey, Thomas.
In both your fiscal notes and your water notes.
Mhm.
Well, this was fabulous. You factor in the elasticity of pricing.
We do. This one, I will say, you can really. I dove into the literature 2 years ago, looking at the SDR surcharge.
Right.
I will say there's quite a bit of variation in elasticity estimates, and it really depends on whether you're looking at hotel motels, short-term rental stays. I've plugged in kind of somewhere in the middle of the range, a little bit of a elasticity estimate. I mean, these elasticity estimates, you're looking on the order of like a negative 0.7. So for every 1% increase in price, you're seeing a reduction in demand of about 0.7%. That's kind of what's baked into this estimate. I will say, right, there are kind of broader macro trends that are right now stronger headwinds than an elasticity behavior change, right? There's relationships with our neighbor Canada, et cetera. So I would say those are also part of the picture.
Continuing on that, and this is probably be for a full fiscal note, not necessarily a walkthrough, but would you also approach with a quick Google search, tell me that luxury and high end are relatively inelastic, but mid-scale and economy housing would be much more unitary elastic, meaning you can see, would you segregate out the anticipated effect on overall market demand in a full fiscal note?
I don't think we would go to that level of specificity. We would try and find an elasticity estimate that kind of reflects the full market for rooms. If you start getting into more speculative things, especially when you're trying to parse what you're seeing in the rooms tax by different segments of the market.
I was really trying to understand how the walkthrough is different than a full fiscal note.
Well, this is a starting point, and I don't think we want, anyway, Ted, why don't you finish? David, did you have a question?
I did have a question.
Yeah.
So, essentially it looks like the first half of this proposal is targeted towards rooms, which is targeted really towards tourism. And I noted in the third page of your walkthrough that New Hampshire and upstate New York are kind of our competitors, at least regionally. And New Hampshire is roughly currently half of what we're proposing as far as rooms taxes. New York City is highlighted, but not upstate New York. Can you characterize what upstate New York room taxes amount to?
I would have to take a look. New York, on the table jumping ahead. New York has a general 4% sales tax applied statewide, and then different localities have different local sales tax rates. And I have to take a look at what it is in neighboring counties in New York. Yep.
Ted, why don't you finish?
Right. So just jot that down because I will leave the room and forget entirely.
Yes. And Ted has sent up, there are lots of resources on, there are hundreds of jurisdictions that have housing surcharges, some of which go into housing trusts, which like VHCB that generate affordable housing. So there are lots of examples for us to look at, which he has sent and NCSL has some, and we have lots to look at on it.
Sure. And so moving from the revenue, from what I understand, there are appropriations in the bill. These appropriations would be placeholders until revenue is finalized. Some of the implementation considerations we were talking about get ironed out as well. But the bill as introduced has $5 million going to DHCD for VHIP, and $14.5 million going to VHCB for housing development projects. So that is the housing investment special fund piece. Looking at the education fund in fiscal year 27, the 1 cent per ounce sugar sweetened beverages excise tax we're estimating. This is a half year revenue. We're assuming January 1 effective date is $7.3 million. And so net of the half a year of SDR surcharge reallocation, you're seeing about $3 million for the education fund. Not within the context of the education fund, that's relatively small, but it's positive. And in fiscal year 28, the full year impact of that switch, you're seeing losing $9.2 million from the SDR surcharge reallocation, but gaining $15.8 million for the SSB, use acronym excise tax. And so on that $6.6 million for the education fund, right, in 28. We did provide a page of considerations as you're thinking about these different tax types. In addition, I'll run through these generally. In addition, I do want to note that I didn't put this in the considerations, but it's worth mentioning here, is that because the sugar sweetened beverages excise tax is 1 cent per ounce, unlike a percentage on a base, that amount wouldn't grow with inflation. It would depend on consumption. You know, as we're seeing a little bit of, you know, as people are trending healthier, that base might actually be declining a bit. So that's a consideration there. You would see over time, potentially this benefit to the education fund on that, right, start to shrink. So in addition to that, where you do want to flag the implementation costs. They're certainly not zero. And so we'll gain more information on that. Do also want to note that because it's 1 cent per ounce, for example, in a 2 liter of soda, 2 liter soda is between 67 and 68 ounces. And so that's I'm setting a 67 cent tax, which is a relatively high effective tax rate. The 2 liter soda is $2. And so 67 cents on top of that is much higher than a comparable meals tax, sales tax on goods, right? It's much, much higher. Do also want to note that in jurisdictions that have implemented an excise tax, there has been a pretty strong behavioral response. Whether that's people are buying sugar sweetened beverages in other jurisdictions. A lot of places that have implemented this are in cities. And so folks are it's easier for them to purchase in another jurisdiction, and also just consumption decreases because, right, it's more expensive. So do want to flag that these estimates do account for this type of behavior change, but I would say that there's more downside risk on this tax type. And so certainly something to be mindful of there. And yes, the next two considerations are those cross-border issues. Folks, right, if because there's a relatively high tax on sugar sweetened beverages and they say, okay, I'm going to do more grocery shopping in New Hampshire, but while I'm here, I'm going to go to the stores that are nearby. And so we start seeing less sales tax. We didn't factor that into the estimate, but that's certainly a consideration here. And then the rest of the discussion is talking about competitiveness. This is how the rates, Vermont's tax rates with the surcharge would compare to other jurisdictions. I think it is helpful to look at that with rooms taxes in particular, because there are so many different ways of structuring rooms taxes, and it depends. Different cities have convention center fees. They layer all these different taxes on top. It's hard to say generally how we compare to our neighbors. And thinking about competitiveness with what, for example, Senate Finance talking about something similar, right? Like what's competitive to Vermont is places with trees, maybe not New York City.
Sorry.
Right?
So you have Burlington on there and a discussion of STRs.
So this is looking at the current law tax rate. So if you were in Burlington, this is factoring in, right, looking at the state
You
rate.
may not know that Burlington doesn't allow short-term rentals.
They sharply regulate them, but they
Well,
still have the.
It's not a
tax rate.
short-term rental if it's less than 30 days. And I don't know how many there are, but there's probably like 5 of those.
So yes, these rates are provided for reference.
No, I know. It's just that we also have to take into account that there is nowhere else for people to go in a place like Burlington or in South Burlington if they limit short-term rentals. Like that also makes the price higher of our very limited rental stock. So I just don't want the committee to not understand that there's almost no short-term rentals in Burlington
Anymore, right.
and the rest of Chittenden County and Stowe are looking at it.
No, and I appreciate that. And I think we will dive into this. I think I'm just trying to get a picture of the, and launch this conversation, because I think we have to have it. It's like affordability. We talk about how unaffordable everything is, but we all want to talk about one side of the equation. None of us want to talk about the other side of the equation, which is what we earn and what sets our attitude about what is affordable or not. So we in this building could be addressing what we earn, and we're choosing not to this year. However, with housing, we know it's a crisis, but we also have some financial muscle we can.
I mean,
behind it. And the question is,
If
what
we're
we do.
saying that we want to meet our housing targets,
Correct.
the bill should be about lowering the cost per unit.
That is a piece of it, but they also need more revenue. to build.
Because like there was one that was $20 million. It costs about $600,000 to build a unit of housing right now. That's
I
40
agree.
units of housing.
So I'm just gonna get Ted to finish, and then we're gonna turn to our housing team behind you.
Sure. And this table is for y'all's reference. You can kind of digest these rates compared to other jurisdictions. Quick note on how to look at this table. the state, so in each jurisdiction, for example, if we looked at Boston, the first column shows the base state and or federal rate in that jurisdiction. And then the next column shows the local taxes in that jurisdiction. And then there's a column for the total tax rate in that. So in that locality, so yes, helpful to kind of go left to right and builds the tax rates all the way up.
Are you able to see how much short-term rental revenue is generated in Burlington?
No, we don't have that
Okay.
specific information. We have information about,
But we have an agreement with tax that we could see some of that.
I will look
I mean,
into.
Because I don't want to disagree about something neither of us know, but I believe it's a minuscule amount of money
And it
because
must be going.
you would
down.
have to do 30 days or more unless you also take a Section 8. If you have a Section 8 tenant in your building, you can have one short-term rental. That's gotta be
My
10
Yeah.
houses, maybe. I don't know.
So I also would appreciate it if you, thank you for this, Ted. If you'd be kind enough to send us the, and I, you know what, I have it. I have the link that you sent me. I will send it to the committee on the other resources in your other jurisdictions.
Sure, yes, about specific surcharges dedicating that
Yeah.
housing. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, people should just be able to cruise through it.
Well, one of the things that's important in all of this is how people who are consumers use this information at all.
Yeah.
For example, if you were trying to rent a hotel using a travel agency or other service, or if you're using a convention planner to decide where to put your convention, what information do they give? I'm sure they don't give them this mess.
And how often when you get a price, do
Yeah,
you get
number.
all the taxes?
You get a number that they provide. And so the question is, what are by bay? There's just a limited set of bays. What do they provide?
Right, I agree. And I think when we get into, those are the questions we'll be asking. Ted, anything else for us to look at?
That is it for now.
Great. So given how short our time is, I would love to turn to Chris and Polly and Gus to help paint the picture of the revenue. Right. And before you got here, I just had mentioned that one of the things that I asked the brain trust, the housing brain trust to look at this summer was, okay, so we know we need to be building 7,500 units a year. Of those, how many need state, how many need public support? How many are affordable housing units? And it came back, Chad came back, VHFA came back with a guesstimate of 4,000, 7,500, 4,000 need to be would
Under
benefit.
120% AMI.
I think that's what he is.
Okay.
Okay, Chris Donovan, we welcome you.
Start with the Champlain House. Thanks for having me.
And you
And
have this at your place.
What's that?
You have
You have
a
the-
chart
you
that
have
you
these charts?
provided at our place.
I can just have,
We have.
okay, there's two charts. Just thank you for having me and thanking that the last time revenue was raised for housing in this building came from this committee.
Yeah, 2017.
Nope, nope.
Oh,
Property transfer tax.
yeah. Our transfer tax, the property transfer tax. Absolutely.
And the time before that was 2017.
Right.
So.
Right.
I want to thank this committee for the long history of supporting housing production and to Senator Ron Hinsdale's comments. Yes, we need to do cost and focused on that.
Yeah.
We embrace that wholeheartedly because we want to build as much housing as possible.
Yes, here, here.
So I appreciate the continued focus in this committees on that as well. I know that there are a couple members of the finance committee here, a couple members, people that have been on Ways and Means in the House. And I know raising revenues and everything. So I come here appreciating that as well. As was stated before, 2/3 of the households that in the housing needs assessment, 2/3 of the housing that we need to generate that was mentioned in housing needs assessment needs to be subsidized somehow. It's for people earning up to 120% of AMI, unless we can bring the cost way down. So that number 4,000, it's a big number. I don't think we're talking about getting to that today. I mean, we're talking about getting to that today, but if we can't just flip that switch overnight.
Sorry,
Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
but there's right, so the cost of renting and buying is anticipated to level off or come down in places where we are getting close to achieving vacancy. So did you factor in what happens if we ever, I mean, amazing if we got
Yeah,
better
that would be great.
units a year, and then who can what 120% of AMI is, and who can afford up to 120% of AMI would also change.
You would hope so, as people's incomes go up, right? And I have the chart here if you want me to use real numbers for the committee.
Well, not just as people's incomes go up, but
But
as
it-
the cost of
As the cost of
what
rental
we
goes
spent
down.
2 years talking about is the only research that's endorsed across the country, is that when you build a large amount of multifamily housing, homelessness comes down and rent prices go up.
Right.
That is settled research. If you want
Yeah.
your trust to come in and say that again, great.
Okay,
I know this first chart here, two charts that look very similar. And I just,
which one do you want us to start?
the first one has the big drop off at the end. And, housing production and preservation. And then projected through fiscal year 30 without new revenue. And, so this is, and to Senator Brock's question, this is when the housing has been funded. It's not when it's been built. This chart here, because the different programs that we fund, be it or farm worker housing or shelters or apartments, they all take different times. And so I'm just trying to standardize what we're looking at. This is when the money has been allocated to a development. There's VHFA, VHCB, the department all track when the housing actually comes online too. So
Just make sure
Yeah.
I understand that. The comparisons in terms of cost are based on when the money is allocated.
I'm not doing a comparison on cost. I'm talking about the number of units that have been funded.
And the,
Well, the number of units that have been funded depends on the cost of the unit.
Yeah.
How much state money goes?
How much
into
state
the
money
unit?
goes into each,
but that's agreed on. It wouldn't be on the chart if they hadn't come to it.
right? These are funded.
These are negotiated, developed agreements.
And I'm trying to just understand the time value of money as it's associated with this. And when I'm looking at the money here, what's allocated and what it actually costs at the end, are those necessarily going to be the same?
They generally are, unless there's a longer period of appeal period or what have you. Or
And
some,
you don't know what that period is, do you, at that point, or?
when the project
When
has been funded to when it gets.
no, talking about difference, is there, an average at the end? Are we looking at numbers that are solid in terms of the amount of money that's actually expended for these particular projects? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, so they're different for the different types of, so a VHIP unit may take 6 months or maybe longer at times. But that gets the money gets allocated at the very end, that's reimbursement. And so a VHCB might be the first money that comes in, and then you have to go and assemble all the others financing, and then you get, go through the process. So that might be 12 to 18 months. So, but we could find an average for you for the different types of programs.
That would be great.
Yeah.
If you, sorry, I just want to make sure we get
Yeah,
all the way
and
through by
love
10.
Chris, love Champlain Housing Trust. I think there are people who will be concerned that someone who does housing in Chittenden County is representing the problem, because we need to build housing elsewhere. I think people are going to start to get mad that like the sketches, are like the Burlington waterfront. And we
This is
need
not
to be
Burlington,
talking
it's
about,
statewide.
but we need to see that broken down outside of Chittenden
Right,
County.
right.
Because there are other costs and delays, there are other considerations for how we get those units. And frankly, Chittenden County is now dealing more effectively with its vacancy rate. And the rest of the state has blighted properties, and they're not going to want to see, oh, we're raising all this money and we're looking at projects that are moving in Chittenden County.
That is nowhere here and that is nowhere on this chart.
Well, wait,
So,
to move
You're-
anything that's politically
right. And that's,
almost impossible would take making the case that we're going to build in rural places.
absolutely. We're going to build all over the state where housing is needed and wanted. And I think that is, I think, a piece of our conversation, but I really,
This-
given our time,
This work came from discussions with housing partners all around the state.
these are our
Not
five
just,
housing.
not just me. So, what I want to do is I want to just show you the comparison of these two charts. And, I didn't put it up on the screen, but, so the chart on my right hand is what happens if we don't raise any new revenue. And we just have base funding. This is, on these out here. It's what has been funded. It's, thank you very much. The ARPA funds, fantastic. General funds, increase in the revenue for property transfer tax. That has fueled the capacity across the state to develop more housing of all sorts of different types.
Could you give us an average cost per unit from what we, like, let's say
This
we
is what-
took $10 million of the investment. If you average it across all of the investments, how many units did we get?
I think this is what Senator Brock was.
But you have to have that now. I mean, I don't know that you have, it's not always apples to apples, but how much money are we getting per 10 million? How many units are we getting per $10 million?
Is that for Gus and Polly maybe? Or would you be
We'll try
ready to do that?
Yeah, try to
let's-
answer that
let's
question
give
more generally, but.
Chris, why don't you,
So the concept here is that we're the nonprofit housing network with no new revenue will essentially see our pipeline dry up. And we will be developing 150 to 200 units a year statewide without new revenue. That's just the reality. And new revenue would allow us to contribute to these overall larger housing goals. I have the second chart. I just did some modeling.
Yeah.
So it was $45 million raised. I didn't have the walkthrough. So it's $45 million raised. 30 of it went to VHB for a range of programs. 10 of it went to the Vermont Housing Finance Agency for their home ownership development, and 5 went to VHIP. Then we would be contributing at about, between 500 to 600 units a
If you
year.
define a unit, how do you define a unit?
An apartment or a home or a VHIP unit.
But there's different prices for
They-
apartments and.
Right.
Yeah, and so what I did was put into a model,
Okay.
5 million into VHIP, that has different cost per unit. Up to 50,000. And then I just put these allocations into some models.
So this is in effect, in total cost, the average cost of a unit of housing could be an apartment, it could be a home and so on. And you simply average all of those that
you'd have to average everything from home share through our affordable housing.
To answer your question before, if there's 500 units, we have $45 million, it's 100,000 units, an average.
And you're not including chip.
No, CHIP I actually put into the model.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
so
didn't see it in your.
It's not, CHIP is built into the financing of all the housing.
Again, I'm not sure that I fully understand. When you come to 100,000, what's the 100,000? Is that the amount that you are using to subsidize? It's not the cost of the unit.
No,
It's the cost of the unit that I'm interested in.
So there's other.
What are
leverage.
we building
Yeah.
100,000 or 4,000 or 1,000 of?
Right.
What is it?
Right, so there are other federal sources, other leverage that we bring in to build the units. That's not included in here. I mean, it's in the modeling. So.
Well, in terms of the target, what's the unit cost? How much are the average units cost? If somebody were to go, to buy one, for example?
Well, it depends on where you're looking or to rent it.
Well,
I mean,
I don't know
we
what
have
we're talking
everything.
about is my question.
But I think that's part of our ongoing discussion. We have everything from VHIP, which may be on average $39,000 to create a new unit, to 600,000, let's say.
Right.
So it's a whole range.
Right, but the 600,000 is not going to be what the state puts in. It's
Right.
going to be leveraged
But
for other
it
financing
will-
with a private more public funds.
So you're saying $400 million a year to
45.
build 4,000 units a year at $100,000 each.
If you wanted, I
Probably.
mean, it's, yeah, I
45
mean,
No, it's 400
well, if you wanted to do 4,000
units.
units.
subsidized units
Right.
a year.
Right.
And so I'm not sitting here suggesting that the legislature do that.
Right, and this doesn't raise anywhere near that.
Right. But it's a start.
Is the question that is, are you saying that the amount of money that you're talking about is the amount of money that VHCV, for example, would have in play for for each unit that is to be built? Is that what we're talking about?
Correct.
So
But we have these.
we have them and we'll invite them up together in a second. Chris, what else would you like to share with us?
That's all I really want.
Yeah, I mean, I think
demonstrate is-
methodology is critical, and I'm wondering,
Yeah.
did you ask your housing partners how many, we can't, like, I would love to build 4,000 units of housing and have the federal
Yeah.
drawdown and make it affordable. How many units does the affordable housing community think it can build a
Well,
year?
you can see the capacity when there was resources. We could. do that.
1,400.
Yeah, we could do maybe even more. I mean, I'm not, when there are resources, we have a pipeline.
So,
We feel that
but don't you think 1,400 is, like, you think you could build 4,000 instead of 1,400?
Not at the current staffing.
Not at the current inflation or tariff.
You know, I mean, I
Okay.
mean, that would be a big lift, right? That's why,
Okay.
you know,
I mean, should
have
we be
this-
looking at 1,400 as like I mean, we're never
I
gonna
would-
have more money than we got out the door from the federal
Yes,
government.
no, I mean,
Maybe when housing gets so expensive.
2 years ago, I came up with a 10-year model and it started out at
That's right.
200 million a year. And it was gonna generate, 11,000 units of housing.
I thought
Over-
it's
And it's got scaled.
3,000 units. It's to replace.
Scaled, no, it's got scaled back to about 100 million and then it was 7,500.
Thank you, Chris. I'm gonna switch to Polly and Gus and this is just setting the table for this conversation. So thank you very much.
It was 1,400.
Yeah. Chris and Polly. To Gus and Polly. Chris, thank you. Pull up one of your chairs. I think we're gonna need. Thank you. Let's see this.
Can I just say while they're getting up?
Yeah.
Eventually, I mean, I'd like to know the cost per unit in all of the housing regions, I don't know that it's gonna relate to this bill, but what we eventually need to know is what money it would take in each region of the state to meet their housing targets, which is a different, and to loosen up vacancy. It's a different that's why we have the housing targets. It's like,
Yeah.
what does Glover need to meet its housing targets? What does
And next-
Rutland need?
And to that, next week, we're having some of our housing partners from all over the state. We can
Uh-huh.
ask to do exactly that. So let's ask that. I think that's a key piece of this.
In those comparisons, I would really like to know, the population demographics that we're all experiencing. That's,
Yeah.
What's happening in Chittenden County is quite different.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Exactly.
knowing that we have a negative
Yeah.
immigration
I don't think
situation.
we've defined the need clearly. I mean, I define the need every breath I take, but I don't think we've defined the need now that we have housing target numbers. Like that would be,
Well, I challenge
this is a really
that.
undefined conversation. And it's being defined by taxes that aren't gonna get
The need is being defined by all the work that's being done by our RPCs right now. And
Yeah.
we will be very clear on our need by December 26th. In addition to this work. So I think we're gonna have a very clear picture of the need.
Right, I mean, they're just saying the
Very
thing
true.
stopping their need in most of the places of the state is the land use review board. So
That-
like I don't know how far a small amount of money is gonna get us, and I'd rather define the need and
That is what we're trying to do. So Holly and Gus, would you be kind enough to take over and help us define the need?
Madam Chair, for the record, Gus Steele, Executive Director from the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board.
And Holly Major, the policy director for Vermont Housing and Conservation Board.
Let me start off with some broad numbers to remind you of that we provided in past presentations. And just also to say that in the more than 3 decades I've spent working on this issue, we've always incrementally attacked this problem. We've never been in a position to say that we can raise enough revenue or get enough partnership to solve it in 5 years. And that was true even before I started this work in the heyday of the Section 8 new construction substantial rehab program. So I think some of the questions you're asking are important questions that there are not easy answers to.
Right.
And certainly not down to the level of Glover, Vermont, but certainly there are regional questions. Broadly, we presented to you a few weeks back our work over the course of the pandemic, which was investment in more than 5,600 homes, apartments, and shelter beds across the state, and special facilities, whether for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, recovery residences, trying to meet a broad range of need that includes home ownership, and includes rental housing, and includes making homes accessible where otherwise somebody might need a nursing care facility, farm worker housing. So there are very different costs for each of that. Over the course of those 5,600 residences, we invested $80,000 per unit. We leveraged the state's dollars or the ARPA dollars with another just about $2 for every dollar provided to us from one of those sources. A big part of the question you've always asked us is how much leverage can we get? Where can the leverage come from? And what we're trying to do, I think the other point we tried to make is we're always looking to have an catalytic impact where we do something and it sets other things in motion. So we don't count in our numbers the housing we did not invest in the South Burlington New Town Center, but we were the first 2 buildings that helped the developers free up their capital to begin to work on other developments. Same thing in the TIF district in St. Albans and Cambrian Rise and Stonecrop and Middlebury. We kind of become an anchor, and that helps get some private sector investment by itself that we don't report to you on our numbers because I couldn't say, but for our investment, I can't say that it wouldn't have happened, but I can say, having talked to developers over the years, that having freed up some of their initial investment, it allows them to go on and do more. That happened in Morrisville, Vermont, on a smaller scale than those other projects I talked about. Somebody did a turnkey deal to a nonprofit of 30 units, and then he built 60 more, and that got his money back out of that initial investment and infrastructure built in. What I'd like to do in the few minutes we have is to also say that whatever revenue you can provide, and like Chris, I've been around a long time and seen how difficult it is to raise revenue. It will send a signal to developers to take risks that they might otherwise not take, because why are you going to go option a property, begin engineering, begin permitting if you don't think your deal can be done? So we are beginning to see a fall off in applications. Having said that, we will have more applications than we'll have the dollars to provide. I just want to give you a few very quick ideas of things that can happen in the future if there's more resources and may not happen without. So if you just walk down Court Street, you have all this parking, including behind the federal building. Federal building, which has been empty since the flood of 23, is vacant. The community is very concerned about its future. There are people who have bought property in Montpelier and Barre and just sat on it and left it vacant for years and years. They've done some feasibility work. They believe that parking lot behind the federal building, we can build 90 units and houses.
Who did that work?
The Commission on Resilience in Montpelier.
Okay.
Ben Doyle's.
Ben is the part, the Commission on Resilience has not been, Ben is on the city council.
Right. John Copans.
John Copans is.
John, that's right.
They're probably gonna ask us for a loan so that they can try to buy up that property so that they can have some future on it. That's what you're looking at right here. There is more opportunity in the TIF district than St. Albans. There is a property, put some money in the capital budget for last year in Brattleboro at the site of the Austin School where probably 200 units could be developed. In Bennington, at Putnam Block, there are still 2 parcels to be developed. Evernorth has an option on one for 30 units. In Newport, we have just begun phase 2 at the Sacred Park site, but there's room for more housing in a phase 3. When we celebrated the signature of the CHIP district, Fairhaven indicated the desire to build housing there. I know from talking to Commissioner Farrell, they're looking at state land in Virgins. There's been a lot of discussion over the years in the Regional Planning Commission. Madam Chair, and your district is very interested in the empty prison site at Windsor, which is a nice residential neighborhood. There's water and sewer at the site. So there is lots of potential to do more, and we're hearing from the community. But will people continue at the pace that we've had of a little over more than 1,000 units a year of all types I described, without there being a signal that there was going to be money? I don't think so. Here's something that we just got an application for. We have not analyzed it, but this reflects the planning that the city of Burlington has done and the rezoning in the south end. This would be a 204 unit development. They're asking us for support for 67 of them. That wouldn't be market rate, what would be more affordable. Likely to sort of, even after CHIP, they likely probably need something like $7 million from us. We haven't, can't talk about details because we just got the application materials on Friday. But obviously, when I talk about catalytic impact, if you can put $7 million at whatever the cost is going to be into a deal, $100 million deal, you're going to have a positive impact on the housing market.
Can we pause here?
Yeah, it just, we're over time. And so I'd love to be able to get Gus and Polly to finish.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to talk about things that will lower the cost of housing, that when an affordable housing partner comes in and when we use state dollars, they're getting a density bonus. We keep it at a certain number of units. They get expedited permits. They might get a construction materials tax break. Like, I'd just like to talk about things that could lower the cost of the project.
Yeah, no, that's a piece.
Please, you know, it just, I can't see spending more time on trying to raise $40 billion in an impossible environment to do that. I can see us talking about lowering the cost of all of these projects when an affordable housing partner is brought in and when state dollars are brought in.
We would love to be able to figure out how to lower costs. We're looking at the issues we can control. My board spent a huge amount of time at its annual retreat bringing in architects and builders to talk about that. One of the interesting insights the builders brought to us is when we're looking for labor, we are competing with people who are building luxury homes. And there's more profit margin in a luxury home than there is in an affordable home. And we don't have enough workers, but that's a question for another day.
Right.
To go to our budget, what you see here is what our budget is. In the coming year, the congressionally directed spending is almost a miracle. That's not necessarily to be repeated. We hadn't had it last year. Likely in an election year, Congress can't pass budgets. We won't see any of it. So that's probably a 2-year number rather than a 1-year number, and comes with a bunch of restrictions. But it is about half of what we averaged our total budget during the pandemic, which was in the $77 million range that we were able to commit to projects across the state. So we're going to have less capacity, and that's why I say the signal we'll be sending to developers out is bring us projects and you'll be able to complete them. Because you can be helpful there if you can raise more money or provide one-time money or any others. Already talked about some problems. This is a
Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston, did a design competition that students, across 3 schools worked on. This is 60 units that could be built at J. Don't have an application for it, but again, speaking to rural communities, the shortage of housing, this is a very exciting modular construction innovation. One of the things we're trying to do to be innovative and save costs, we just made a small grant to the Rutland chapter at Habitat for Humanity. They have this facility that they have just relocated to where they want to do panelized indoors to speed up construction. There are 2 service organizations in Rutland that have agreed that that's going to be their service projects to the community. Habitat is the most affordable homeownership that we can get because the homeowners sign up to do something like 400 hours of sweat equity.
Right.
You still need professionals, but that's one of the ways, Senator, that we're trying to address the cost issue. And I understand we might say it's a drop in the bucket, but we used to do 4 units a year with Habitat. Recent years, it's been 7 or 8. If this facility helps us to get to 10 a year, I'm very happy.
That would be great.
And so we'll give it a try and see if it works. This is another Rutland project that has been under negotiation with the Archdiocese, which is in bankruptcy court. That there's now an option on, and the plan here is half of the site at the Loretto home would become a shelter, and the other half will be mothballed until there's enough money to turn that into permanent apartments. So I know we're over time, so I won't.
No, you have till, we have till 15.
Okay. So let's say a couple more words.
This is right in downtown Rutland. We looked at this, but I feel like we
Not quite
Western.
Western Edge.
But you want to say a word or two about this one, or should I just keep going? Okay, we're going to keep going. The idea is also to demonstrate to the neighborhood that there is hopefully a connection between people going into shelter and moving into permanent housing. But there isn't the financing right up front to do that. And then I'm going to stop. Here is the last thing, which meets our mission, but we're going to get some requests to help with the location of the Norwich Farmers Market, and adjoining it is a site that we could build 2 15-unit buildings on. So this is just to give you an example of things that are not in our immediate pipeline, but that there is a great opportunity. And to the extent that you help us send a signal that there'll be more resources, I expect we'll get more applications that will be more ready to go. Just going to Senator Brock's question of time value of money. There's the time value of certainty that or reasonable certainty that you get your project funded is going to make a big difference. And we will see things slow down without that signal. People will match they'll still exceed our budget in terms of their hopes and dreams, but they'll go faster. And we saw that. We went from a much lower level of production, even with the help of a housing revenue bond, in the 3 years prior to the pandemic. And when the pandemic era funding became available, people ratcheted up. And there are, we converted 12 hotels to housing and shelters all over the state. That was an example of trying to be very cost efficient. Hotels were cheaper and faster in most instances. Across the pandemic, our average cost of our multifamily portfolio was about $335,000 a unit. We will not duplicate that because costs have gone up so much. It's much less expensive beginning of the pandemic to build housing than it is today.
Yeah, right. Okay, sure.
What if certain affordable housing organizations themselves became Act 250 exempt? I mean, what if you then, you're the Housing and Conservation Board. If you're involved,
Right. That would bring.
you're meeting all of our environmental standards. You talk about certainty, right? Like if you're going in with a developer, that also brings them a lot of certainty.
That's an interesting idea. Yep. I had not thought of that. I'm happy to think more with you about that.
That is an interesting idea. And
Where would you be building though outside of tier 1? Or in fact, it is already.
Tier 1B and tier 2 need, and besides, those Act 250 exemptions right now are temporary.
Right.
So everything besides tier 3. Tier 2 right now, is a huge chunk of the state. And we really haven't done anything to incentivize housing development there that is affordable or even multifamily. Tier 1B, it would be the perfect place to say any project that is partnering with an affordable housing partner is exempt because they are exempt.
No, that is a great idea and one I think we should explore. Good, this is good. I think just to go to finish on Gus's point, put a pin on it. I think with all business, what we hear in every committee is stable expectations, stable funding, knowing what's coming in, knowing what can be expected, signals a climate in which they want to invest their time and energy. And I think to go to I think that is post-COVID, that's an important thing for us to be able to do. And we've done it in part with the addition to in the PPT tax. But I think, and certainly we're going to be addressing this as we look at the additional loan capacity the treasurer is rolling out for us. And with the, and we're going to be revisiting this with Alex and the treasurer with the offsite pilot involved purchasing, involved bulk housing development. They have a proposal for that as well. Again, those are loans, it's very different. And perhaps you'd like to, because this is great new money coming into housing development conceivably. And because we're looking at if we raise that 10 to 12.5, that's $30 million again, their loans. How does that, I mean, you partner with the treasurer and the local investment advisory committee a lot. Well, can you just speak to that? Because we're going to be looking at that also.
So, well, two things. You're right that we have partnered on lots of deals with the treasurer's office where because they're providing debt at, let's say, 2% or 3%, that's much less expensive than a commercial loan. And so it helps the borrower borrow more money and it means less of our money. It doesn't reduce the cost of the project, but it reduces the cost of borrowing. Reduces the cost of borrowing. I don't know if the treasurer's used his funds as a construction loan. One of the things that happened over the course of the pandemic was construction lending went from 3% to 9% for a while. And so when you think about, 18 months at 9% on a $15 million project, that added cost. The treasurer's done some projects that are just much more focused, and I think this is true of the roofs over Rutland with Freddie and down there, where they're just making loans, but the housing they're producing is in as I understood it, in the $2,400-$2,500 a month level for rentals. So that serves a segment of the market, but not people who are making $50,000-$60,000 a year and less. Certainly not people who are on SSI, which was our discussion in the other body yesterday with their Human Services Committee, and how do we get people out of transition to hotel to close down. So there's a range of different needs across the continuum. The treasurer's dollars are a big help, but there are a lot of Vermonters who you just have to bring the capital costs down, whether you're talking about home ownership or rental. To speak for a moment to the project we all celebrated in your community in Shelburne this year. 26 home ownership units delivered at under 200,000 a unit to the home buyers. It included a purchase by the state trooper, included 2 people who worked at Wake Robin, a chef at Shelburne Farms, a single mom who worked in childcare using Section 8 to home ownership to be a homeowner, probably the last person who gets to do that. So I think we do serve a wide range of people, from people who are disabled to people who are what I call the essential workforce. But even when you're in that mid-range of $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year, it's not enough to have low-cost debt to get affordable home ownership or affordable rental. You need to bring the capital cost down.
Right. Second. And what were you on average those homes were sold for? Just
180.
that's amazing.
Right. And so the headline was it was $550,000 a unit when we took the cost of the project and divided it by the number of units. Amazing things were done with it. I'm just the biggest champion of that project, and I got pushback from people who very much support housing because that, you know, that's taking labor and resources and time and money. And people are going, it's very hard to say, you know, we're going to raise taxes to fund units at $550,000 per unit. And even that would be great, because if the project wasn't 94 units and someone cut the units in half, which is so common around the state, we'd be spending enough that we'd be national news like Chicago for the cost of an affordable unit of housing.
You know, I appreciate that, but I also think we have to remember that this would be funding everything from VHCB, I mean, from VHIP to our more expensive affordable housing units. So if I would love to have an average cost, if we look across the spectrum of the whole range of housing, I mean, home share is even lower than VHIP, but if we take an average cost of a new unit coming online, it's 38,000 of our investment, of state investment, up to 100,000 our investment. That is not 500. I mean, the cost I appreciate, but I also know that the cost, that is a wide range of cost that we're trying to enable, not just.
I think our unique work this year is to say, how does our investment lower the cost per unit? What can we do to say, now the state is investing and it needs to be a denser project. We need to pile on other support. Like, that's what I hope the affordable, I mean, you don't know how I feel. Like,
Right,
you
but-
need to come to us and say, I mean, you
But
got
that
the LURB.
is, that,
The LURB is now in the way of a lot of projects. Like, we're,
Keisha, I completely appreciate that, but I also.
I feel sincere urgency about this because we're just talking about something that's not gonna make it.
The conversation has to be had, though. I'm sorry. I think that it's a piece of the conversation that we have to have, Tom.
Not necessarily to the two witnesses, but on this topic, I'll just say I'm generally supportive of the sugary sweet beverage tax. The lodging tax I have great pause with, but I'd rather focus our energies on what I think is feasible this session. And I think that's on permit reform and not on new revenues to fund housing initiatives like this. That's where I think our energy should be placed.
And I appreciate that. I think that you have just heard from some of our best partners on housing, why it's important for us to think about revenue.
If I could add
Gus,
just one.
and then
more-
we're gonna break.
One more thought for consideration, which is I appreciate focus on cost. I have never across my career seen costs go down dramatically. I've seen costs get stabilized. Maybe we're at a moment in time where we can reverse that trend, but I think the other thing you need to think about, and that is we wrote into our statute, or your predecessors did, is how much are we leveraging? And I think and I think there's two different kinds of leverage I'm speaking to. One is people who live in Shelburne, work in Shelburne, getting to live in Shelburne and be homeowners is a certain kind of leverage and currency, whether you're a teacher, a nurse, a janitorial worker at one of the great facilities Shelburne has. The other kind of leverage, and this goes to the proposal that CHD and Ride Your Bike, the Ride Your Bike folks are working on here, is the utilization of a 4% tax credit, which is an unlimited tax credit, virtually unlimited tax credit. So all that private equity coming into Vermont is also of value. So when I say, you know, spend $7 million, a block of 200 unit, $100 million deal, I think that's a great return on investment for the state of Vermont.
We need to
All
start
things that-
leveraging for density. We need to start leveraging to say, we're putting this much money in and it's a VHCB project. So it's going to get 20% more units. That's not coming down. Because that actually brings the cost down for the consumer as well.
Yeah, it
We
also,
need more units.
we do, and I think you'll also find if you want to serve the rural communities, that density that's appropriate to Chittenden County, not necessarily work in some of those locations. The other kind of leverage that we're seeing, and Madam Chair, you saw this in Windsor, is leveraging funds to clean up polluted sites like the one on Main Street. That's one of the things that's happening in Sacred Park. So the price tag is way too high. I agree with that. But when we're bringing in dollars that wouldn't normally serve a housing development to do that cleanup, that's a good thing.
Right,
I
but then
would-
that's cost that needs to be spread across more units. And even in our rural places, if we're gonna have an elevator, if we're gonna, build more than 3 stories,
Yeah, I was trying to be specific to, if we bring in, if the price tag is higher, but we brought in environmental cleanup dollars that would not normally build housing someplace in that location or any place, I view that cost a little bit differently than I would view the high cost of building.
Right.
Because you're getting a non-housing source to pay for it, you're leveraging that.
Right, which we did, and we actually got a second, some other options on how to address that contaminated dirt, which we did last year. Thank you to this committee. So thank you. We're gonna go off live. We're gonna come back at 10:30. Thank you, everybody. I think